Hi, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Coffee Chat with CastleHill. Joined today by Joseph Arokiaraj and Thomas Ludwig. Joseph, you're one of our principals, so you've introduced yourself before. So I'm gonna skip your introduction. I apologize. Thomas, maybe you could just give a little bit of background and your role, and maybe just some of the history.
Sure, I can. First, thanks for having me here. It's a pleasure to join the coffee chat. I don't have any actual coffee. My name is, as you mentioned, Thomas Ludwig. I work with MetricStream, specifically on cyber GSC implementations. So that's IT risk, IT compliance. I work with a lot of customers that want to improve their operations there. My background before MetricStream is in cybersecurity. I worked for a company called TVD Networks that built the infrastructure for the largest secure network in the world for the Air Force. Before that, I was a consultant at McKinsey and Company.
So you have a little bit of experience in this space. So thanks for joining us, Thomas. So we're going to talk about a couple of things, and we're going to circle back a little bit towards the end of this to a product offering that you've been spearheading with MetricStream called Velocity. So it's very exciting, very, very interesting. But maybe just to make sure that we level set the overall topic and why it's a powerful tool, let's talk about some of the common controls frameworks and different frameworks that are out there. So what is the background for some of these things?
I think the typical situation that we have is that our customers have to comply with multiple frameworks. A typical example would be ISO 27001. That's a framework where people want to be certified. So they have a situation where an auditor will come in and will thoroughly check that they are compliant. At the same time, they have other frameworks, something like SOC 2, where they also have to provide reports. There is no formal certification, but in many cases, they actually work with the same auditor to provide similar information for both areas. And in our experience, the overlap between ISO 27001 and SOC 2 is approximately 70%. So if you do it in an ad hoc manner, you basically go to the people in the organization and ask for certain evidences regarding these security reviews twice, at least in 70% of the cases. You ask for this almost same information twice. And I think that is first a waste of resources. It's also something that really annoys people, to be honest. And it also has the effect that you cannot focus on more important things because you duplicate work. So I think our experience is going from these specific frameworks, and yes, SOC 2 has a different focus from ISO, but finding common controls that allows you to cover both is really a big benefit.
Yeah, I would agree with Thomas in that those two are specifically applicable to an information security, information management kind of a framework or situation whereby customer is typically a SaaS provider of some sort. So there you're looking at that kind of controls for service organizations kind of a framework, and that's where that overlap happens. I agree with you, Thomas, and that really is focused on your network controls, right? Your secured assets and all from a PCI standpoint, some of those other aspects that come into play. But definitely that in the context of those five trust principles, as they call it, security, privacy, and a few others, all put together gives what we're talking about as an excellent starting point. Yeah.
Why do you think that we have so many different frameworks? I know the answer, but I'm just looking for your folks' opinion on that part of it. Right? We've got too many frameworks, and one of the common questions we always get, of course, is why aren't these synchronized in a way? Right? Just to your points, why do we see these different frameworks being put forward by different organizations?
If I try and answer, I think the good reasons and the bad reasons. I think the good reasons are they're really different requirements. I think, as Joseph just said, the history of ISO 27001 was it developed from the British 17799 standard that again came out of a shell. It was really something that an IT organization was driving. And then SOC 2, for comparison, is really driven by the AICPA. So it's driven by people that do audits. It really derives from the audit perspective. So they're really two different perspectives that are really important. One is the security professional, the other is the auditor. So that they use different language, different methods, it makes a lot of sense. So that I think these are the good reasons. The bad reasons is probably just a certain historical ballast, if you want. So that certain things developed over time. For instance, ISO is now in the current version, it's 8 years old. It's by its very nature, because it's an international standard, it's not updated that frequently. SOC 2, on the other hand, there are updates pretty much every year. So it's basically bureaucratic reasons, for reasons that ideally we would have just one group of people that define the perfect standard, but that's not how it works. And I think we'll have to live with that. What I find interesting is a general trend that it used to be in the past that ISO, and as I said, is a British standard originally, was driving it. What's interesting is now there's a lot of investment in the US, specifically coming from NIST, and that's driven by presidential orders that go back, I think, 12, 15 years.
Yeah.
There's a lot of investment in the US, and I think the US standards are getting better, being more accepted globally now. And I think that's also important guidance for us if we focus a little bit more on the NIST standards because of that.
Good point. And to add to that, depending upon where you are from an IT perspective, from a customer perspective, as you know, we deal with data. That also comes into the realm of information systems, and that has privacy connotations. You got GDPR for that, and then you got HIPAA if you're in the healthcare industry. That's where these frameworks add up, Tim, right? And then if you're looking at HIPAA, given customer probably uses high trust, which is another kind of a control set mechanism. So that's how it gets tangled and entangled to many different things, and then gets much bigger and bigger.
So you touched on this a little bit, Thomas, already in terms of why this is important. Why are these frameworks important? What's the benefit to me as a CISO or as a information security risk professional or IT risk professional?
I see two benefits. One is you're really standing on the shoulders of giants. You don't have to do all the work. It's really amazing how much work went into these standards. So even if some of the content is not relevant for you, you can read through it in a few minutes and make your decisions, as opposed to trying to invent it yourself. So it's just much more efficient. And I definitely would recommend that. Just from that perspective. And there's so many standards. I've been in the industry for 20 years. Whenever I see a standard that I haven't looked at in detail, I learn something new. So pure content is really, really important. The other part is, how should I say, it is, you can easily justify it. Sometimes if you go, let's say you go to an executive, you have to explain, why did you do this? Let's think about the worst case. You were hacked, and you have to explain, why did it happen to you? Why did you follow the specific procedures? It's much safer to say, oh, I followed these procedures because these are the ISO controls. It really gives me a much better point to make than say, oh, I thought this is the right thing to do. So it really gives us backing from that perspective. So both things, content and institutional backing.
Yeah, to add to that, yeah, it gives you an starting point, and then also allows you to then um, roll up data in a much easier manner. Once you test it once, right? Once you've gone through the pain once, and once you have hopefully taken the time to combine all of these frameworks in some kind of rationalization exercise, then you're able to comply to many sort of a thinking, right? So that's where it all comes together, and that's where the pre-configured content that MetricStream, which Thomas will talk about, has done a lot of that work for you, is where it all comes together.
Thomas, just to pick up on a comment you made before that, it would be nice if the organizations got together and normalized all of this content and information, but that in reality, that's the CISO's job at the end of the day, or his team's job, right? Or their team's job overall to have that activity. So how have customers dealt with that in the past, or how have people dealt with it in the past?
I think it's fair. This doesn't take away the work. I think the work is still very real. But I think following these frameworks gives you guidelines, gives you direction. It makes it also somehow easier to structure your own work. It's sometimes just thinking about frameworks you can use. Yes, for instance, if you use another framework that is commonly used now, the NIST cybersecurity framework, it structures everything into 5 functions. That gives you a little clarity how, for instance, to organize your team. You can say this is a team that works on detection. That gives you a certain simplicity. In even typically the groups we work with are not huge. We're not talking about hundreds of people. We're talking about teams that are 10 to 15 people that have to cover a lot of ground. Just saying, okay, these 2 people work on detection. These 2 people work on recovery. That really makes life easier to also for us to understand our own roles, because we all know they're changing all the time. There's a new thing coming in. Last year, there was a lot of discussion about ransomware. Then there were discussions about supply chain. These are new things, new discussions. If you have this framework, it's much easier to fit them into the existing framework and say, okay, because of this, these two people will work on this. And I think that's also from a CISO perspective really important. The CISO that I know, I think at the end of the day, the most important job is to keep talented people happy, to hire more talented people in a market where it's really very difficult to get cybersecurity specialists. And if you give them clear goals and allow them to achieve them, and also, build on something that's recognized in the industry, that makes the CISO job more important. And I think ask any CISO, they'll say, yeah, my most important job is to keep my people happy and to have more people. And giving them structure, giving them goals really helps.
And to add to that, Tim, if I may, right, it gives the structure, as Thomas said. So, to throw out a couple of examples there, the granularity of work that you're doing, if it's captured the right way, the reporting is done the right way, and management gets to see when you're doing change management, for example, that might be enough for SOX. But whereas here you're looking at what kinds of changes. Is it configuration changes? Is it really a patch? Is it data related changes, right? So that kind of granularity and the categorization comes from these various control family kind of details that you have from NIST and all these other frameworks, which you can then take again as a starting point, come up with what works for you, and then assign it or align it with your control activities, and then the roll-ups can be easily done after that.
I know, Joseph, you've talked to me in the past about some of the Adobe use case and some of how they've aligned this. Want to expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, certainly. Adobe went through this process exactly the way we're talking about it, right? They kind of struggled with it. And then being Adobe, they not only have to uh, perform like a SaaS provider, they're also doing some hosting here and there. So that's where one requirement, one stakeholder, where they may have started, then quickly added up to FedRAMP, for example, because they're having to do hosting. So that's where what they did is they took it down to their environment, their set of controls, looking at it from an information security perspective, and then came up with those control activities, right, which are typical rows on the report that you would eventually produce, and then came up with these control families or categorizations. And if you look at the report, it covers a lot of the categories that we're talking about here. Access. If you're looking at information access, it's typically access control, right? That's the SOX way of looking at it. But then they took it and then looked at it differently, because often access control is handled in a tool called Okta or something else, right? So that's where they came up with a category called identity and access management. And then they have a section for backups. They have a section for business continuity and so on and so forth. So they did the categorization, and then they did the various linkages and sort of crosswalked all these different frameworks that we're talking about, and then came up with a nice reporting layout that it's all available in the open source there in terms of what they did. But pretty much going through the pane once, and then doing all the linkages to be able to link up to these other frameworks. So that way you can demonstrate that you've done it once and you're complying.
Interesting that you worked on the Adobe framework. It's actually one of the frameworks that we support in MetricStream. And I like it, actually. It's not the most commonly known. The most commonly known is probably UCF or SCF. But what I really like about Adobe is it is a framework that is really easy to use if you're a relatively small shop and want to get started with it. Obviously, Adobe is not a small shop. I mean, they're also not huge, but I think they're a very smart set of people have worked this out. And I think it's a really nice framework to work with.
Why don't we take that as a launching point and talk a little bit, Thomas, about what you've done then inside of MetricStream and how you've aligned all these different frameworks and what the Velocity product's about.
Yeah, and I think the word velocity already says it. We found that it can be very time consuming to get these things going. You typically have, if you're specifically looking at the IT compliance side, at things like ISO 27001 and SOC, you have an annual cycle where it's actually hard to introduce something new quickly. So what we found, it's really powerful to have this content ready to go out with something, and it could be Adobe CFF or it could be another framework that allows you in one shot to lift you to a higher level where you can now say, we have these common controls, as you just mentioned, Joseph. that allow us to cover multiple frameworks. We have these structures that these control families that give us overview. This is IAM, this is backup. So that gives us a very quick move. That actually allows us to have just a workshop about this framework, and a week later we have everything in the system, and we can start really working in a more programmatic way. We found that extremely important. The other thing that we found important, and that alludes a little bit to the point that you made earlier, Joseph, is there is a gap in information security between the high level picture when you explain to executives these are our top risks, and the nitty gritty work at the bottom where you have to upgrade these sets of servers before the support runs out or something like that. And what really helps here is to have a clear structure how the high level is connected to the nitty gritty. These frameworks again help. What we also found very helpful is to have an assessment cycle that you can really tie certain activities that you have about, let's say, patching servers, how you can tie it to business risk. That you can say the business risk in this part of the organization is higher because we have we're not scoring that well in this category, and that then ties back to many things on the ground. And we found that these two things, getting the shared common controls and connecting the high level risks to the nitty gritty work at the bottom, we found that are really important things. And in Velocity, we basically try to have that prepackaged in a way that you can get started quickly. We also know getting started quickly doesn't mean that you're done quickly. This is a never ending story. Threats are changing, technologies are changing, but having a framework in place quickly is really what helps.
No, that sounds really exciting. The piece of it that I found really interesting is the fact that you're providing that launching pad for that person who may be challenged by deciding where their control framework is going to be to overcome those decisions quickly, right? And really saying, here's a system that's actually supporting the decision making process, not just forcing you to do that in some analysis circle outside of it and try to justify it back to audit.
I think that's a good way of putting it. We believe that just being able to make a decision quickly, yes, we'll work with this framework, really helps you. Even if at some point all this will change, we know change is a given, but getting out of the situation that you don't know where to start. So finding the starting point is really, really important, because of course, you still have change, but you're now working at a higher level. And for that, coming back to the point that you made in the beginning, for that, it's really important to rely on some established framework, because there are many things in there that are good from a content perspective. And it's also important that you have the backing of the brand name, if you will. Yes, we're following ISO, we're following NIST. That it makes it easier to jump and decide, yes, we'll do it this way. Except instead of, to some extent, everybody is always muddling through. Jumping to these frameworks gives you a lot of structure.
Anything else you want to add, Joseph, or anything else in the piece?
Yeah, a couple of key points I want to add to the MetricStream offering. The way it's been put through, the Velocity offering involves training on the front end that Thomas had talked to us about in our previous discussions. I think it's critical because a lot of times when you're going at a fast pace, right, when you're doing just a matter of weeks kind of implementation, you as a user, you're expected to be hands-on, right? That's where you see how it's done, but also learn from it so you can take it and run with it. So that's where the training component on the front end, Thomas, that you're offering is critical. Gives the tools needed, and also they're able to kind of see how it's done, and that way you're piecing together the use case as you're going through and talking through it in the context of a training exercise with some hands-on work, and then that directly puts you into a configuration exercise where you can then start looking at personalizing certain things as it applies to how they're doing things and make it their own, right? So that's where it comes with, it gives you the key building blocks in terms of what you're looking at.
So get started fast, phase through it, and continue that whole iterative process that's so critical to solving this. Like, as you mentioned, Thomas, it's a never-ending story that we have to go through. And so starting to think about it in that way versus, hey, here's a project, we're going to complete it at a certain point. It's effectively a way of life.
Yeah. And then hopefully, just to finish that thought, just to go back and revisit, the way we frame the conversation, right? Looking at ISO and looking at SOC 2 is an excellent starting point. And so the reason I'm revisiting that is that kind of let me look at a few set of key use cases kind of a framework or frame of mind really helps, right? You come in, stay focused from a scope perspective, get it up and running for those limited use cases. Once it's working, once you know how it works end to end, you've spent some time hands on, then you can come back and add the additional frameworks on top later on. It becomes easier, right? So I think that'll be a good approach.
Well, I really appreciate your time, gentlemen. This is a very exciting offering, Thomas. So congratulations on that part of it. I'm sure it's been a difficult journey to get to this point, because it always is rolling out a new product area like this, or a new service offering, I should say. And so thanks again for joining us, gentlemen, and have a great day.
Thank you, Thomas.
Thank you. It was a pleasure talking with you. Thank you.
I hope that you enjoyed this week's episode of Coffee Chat with CastleHill. For more episodes, insights, and discussion, check us out on YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, or at our website, www.castlehillrisk.com. Thank you again for joining us, and I'll see you next time on a Coffee Chat with CastleHill.